Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you've joined me. I'm so excited to have you back with me again, studying the perfect you. So, we're working on the perfect you in this mental health initiative. This month is the Perfect You book that we're studying, and today we're going to be talking about chapters 4 and 5. I love chapters 4 and 5. I love this whole book. I hope you love this book as much as I do, and I hope you are starting to see how important this is for mental health. Okay, so first of all, if you haven't joined us before, if this is the first time, no problem. You can go to drleaf.com. You can still get your book. You can catch up. These YouTube live are recorded, so you can always go back and watch them. Every day we put up tips and points on my social media to help you. This is the year where we are going to get our mental health under control. We're really going to learn how to renew our minds and bring those thoughts into captivity. And it starts with our identity. Okay, so today we're going to start, as I said, working through chapters 4 and 5, and we're going to start at page 67. So go to page 67 in your books, and if it's in, you can find, just put in the Philosophy of the Perfect You, chapter 4, in your Kindle version to find where you are. And I'm going to read the first quote to you, and it's by John Eccles, who is a Nobel laureate, and this is what the quote says. The essential feature of dualist interactionism is that the mind and the brain are independent entities and that they interact by quantum physics. I know that's a mouthful. This chapter is talking about the philosophy of the perfect you. Why is the philosophy of the perfect you important for you to understand your own identity? Well, the philosophy of the perfect you helps you to understand the approach that I have taken and compares to the different approaches that we can take when we look at uniqueness or a person's unique identity, which is what the perfect you is dealing with. And the philosophy that I adopt is one of what we call dualistic interactionism, which is a fancy word for saying that the mind is not the brain, that the mind is separate from the brain, and that the mind works through the brain. They work together. So dualism means mind and brain, two things. Mind being the spiritual part of you, your thinking, feeling, and choosing, and then brain being part of your body, and which is the physical part. They need each other, and this is why it is interactive dualism. So the mind and the brain work together. My approach, my philosophy is one of interactive dualism, that the mind changes the brain responds to the mind. So the mind is the thing that changes the physical. The other approach, the other philosophy is what we call materialism. And materialism is that the brain produces the mind. So the brain, the physical is the emphasis instead of the mind being the emphasis. And so they talk about the brain, the firing of the neurons in the brain, firing up, getting enough energy, and producing the mind as almost like a mistake. So it's two completely opposite philosophies in approaching humanity, and they have major impact on how you see yourself. The interactive dualism, which is the philosophy that I approach this from, which is a philosophy I adopt, shows us that we have free will, that we are unique, that we are complex humans, and that as we are thinking and feeling and choosing, we are making changes in our physical brain, physical body, and that's impacting the words that we speak. Materialism, on the other hand, is saying the opposite, that you have no free will, that you have no control, that you're not complex, that you're basically a computer, a biological automaton, and that your brain it's all pre-programmed, and your brain is producing the firing. Okay, so to understand this a little bit more easily, I want us to flip back towards the end of chapter 3. Specifically, I want you to go to page 52. So I'm just going there now, and I'm just going to discuss a couple of points from page 52 through the end of chapter 3 to help you put this philosophy chapter into a little bit more perspective, to make it a little easier for you. Okay, so on page 52, in the second last paragraph, I make a statement that I had spoken quite a lot last week about being wired for love. And the first few chapters I discuss extensively about the concept of being wired for love. So on page 52, second last paragraph, I'm going to read something in that paragraph. This wired for love system is designed to respond to calmness, peacefulness, and feeling good, filled with self-confidence and self-esteem. These positive love sensations of feeling safe and confident activate a part of the brain called the striatum. When we do not feel safe, it doesn't get activated. So what the point I'm making here relating to the philosophy is that as you are thinking, feeling, and choosing in the correct way, in your perfect you way, you are going to activate the natural functioning of the brain, and you're going to feel the sense of peace and calmness and self-confidence. These things are sensations and experiences that you will have that will help you to access wisdom. So operating in the perfect you is your mind activating your brain to function in the correct way, and it produces a sense of peace and calmness. So the philosophy of the mind changes the mind works through the brain responds to the mind, is what I'm emphasizing here. As you think correctly, you get the sense of peace. So your mind action of thinking correctly produces the sense of peace. And the result is that the brain is physically, which is the physical part, is activated in the correct way. So then on the next page, 53, I talk about the concept of addiction. And addiction is generally seen as a bad thing, but addiction actually is a perfect you state, because addiction means consumed by. It means to be consumed by. So we are wired for love. So we are designed to be consumed by love. We're designed to be addicted to love. So we are addicted to love. So when love is operating incorrectly through incorrect choices, through incorrect thinking, feeling, and choosing, which can come from just bad habits that we've developed, bad choices we're making, incorrect reactions, getting frustrated, irritated, worried, gossipy, negative, etc. When we do that, or when we experience traumas of like bullying or rape or abuse or poverty or whatever it may be, when we experience those negative signals, we process that through our mind, our brain responds, and we are distorting the love nature of our mind and our brain, and this causes damage in the brain, and we distort the positive addiction into a toxic addiction. So addiction is not something that is a disease. Addiction is, when we have a toxic addiction, it's basically showing that there's something that we need to address deep down inside that's causing us to try and cover up with something like alcohol, or excessive sex, or pornography, or me, myself, and I. We're using something toxic in an addictive way to try and restore the balance back to the healthy addiction. So here is an example again of my philosophy playing out, my philosophy of dualistic interactionism, that the mind and the brain are separate, but the mind influences and changes the brain. We see this in the concept of addiction. Also, if you have a look on pages 54 and 55, you'll see I've got the love tree versus the fear tree, where we can see this interactive dualism, this philosophy playing out as well, where you'll see the roots of the tree representing all the healthy things, healthy thoughts, healthy emotions, healthy words, healthy choices. So I'll hold this up so you can see I'm talking about the love tree. And then that produces basically love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, etc. So the state of our mind is going to produce a state through our entire being, which then activates health in our physical brain and our body. So when we're in the love tree, we are influencing all 75 to 100 trillion cells of our brain and our body to activate and operate in the correct way in response. The fear tree then is the opposite. If you look at the fear tree, it's toxic thoughts, toxic emotions. If you have those kind of mindsets, that is producing toxic stress, which is producing all that list of things that I put there, where we have learning issues and anxiety and addiction and depressions and toxic addiction. Those, when we experience those toxic emotions, those toxic issues, depression, etc., those are telling us that something's wrong. And that's why I always say, when we are in any of those states, anxiety, depression, when any of those things are happening in our life, these are signals to us to embrace and identify the root. It's a signal to you that there's something that you need to address, a forgiveness, an issue, or something. They're not going to go away. Drugging them is not going to help. Suppressing them and squashing them is not going to help. You have to deal with them. Just very quickly over the page to page 57, you'll see a little chart. And in that chart, I explain to you the descent to disorder. How if we don't get back into our perfect you, or use our perfect you, which is our correct way of thinking, feeling, and choosing, in other words, if we don't use our mind correctly, we're going to have a physical reaction occurring in our body. And this happens over time. So as we make a wrong choice, or we experience some kind of toxic emotion, in the now moment, it's a shock. And then over time, it progresses. And you'll see the progression. Shock and uneasiness progresses into worry, over more or less 3 weeks, which then progresses into anxiety, over another 3 weeks, which progresses into trauma, over another few weeks. So within 9 weeks or so, your body, those if you haven't dealt with it, your body's operating in trauma, and trauma is causing brain damage, and it blocks the perfect you. But it doesn't completely block all of you, because your perfect you always dominates. So if you think of a whole big a big globe or something like that, think of something that's like a globe of the world. Think of that represents your thinking, or just think of your brain. Just think of an image of the brain, and basically your perfect you is the dominant force. So this toxic trauma, etc., that you have maybe not dealt with, is not the whole brain. It's not the whole of you. It is only a portion. So you can step out of your imperfect you into your perfect you to fix the imperfect you, the issues that are going wrong. But you have to use your perfect you to recognize them in the first place. So the philosophy of the mind-brain connection is helping us to do that. The last thing I want to point out in terms of helping you understand the philosophy on a practical level, in chapter 3. So when you read chapter 4 again, which I hope you'll do, is flip back between chapter 4 and chapter 3 to help you see the application, is the concept of epigenetics. So if you have a look over to it's over on page 60. Page 60, I talk about the concept of epigenetics, and epigenetics is the definition there, which is on the halfway through the first paragraph. Epigenetics highlights our ability to respond to our environment, which includes everything from what we think to what we generally understand by environmental exposure. So epigenetics is our thinking, feeling, and choosing in response to the external environments, the things that we are going through, the signals of life, all the things that we are experiencing as we wake up in the morning and go through life. So we would take that in, we respond. But that's all mind stuff. So the epigenetics is the environment plus our response, which generates this activity through our brain, and we control that. We control our reactions. We don't control the environmental stimulation, the environmental part of epigenetics, the environmental part of the external stimulation, because we can't control the events and circumstances, but we can control our reactions. So that part of epigenetics, which is the external thinking, feeling, and choosing that is moving through your body, you control those reactions, and then your body responds. So epigenetics, in terms of the mind-brain philosophy, is that you can control your reactions. So now moving back into chapter 4. Let's move back to chapter 4. Okay, and let's have a look now on page 67. Let's look back again at that quote, the essential by John Eccles, just under the title of the philosophy of the perfect you. The essential feature of dualist interactionism, dualist mind and brain, interactionism, they work together. The essential feature is that the mind and the brain are independent entities, and that they interact by quantum physics. If you heard a funny sound, that's my dog on the ground, Jasmine, snoring. Okay, she's sleeping next to my feet, and she's a Shih Tzu, and she's snoring. So if you hear funny sounds, that's my dog. Okay, so just as a side note there. So basically, that quote, if you look at the next quote underneath that, dualism helps to preserve free will. And that's the next point I want to make. You have free will. You have choice. I lay before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. We all know that scripture. Well, that scripture is basically really explained through the concept of dualistic interactionism, through this philosophy chapter, through what I've explained in chapter 3, choice, free will. If you take the opposite view, the opposite philosophy of materialism, that you are your brain and that your brain is controlling you, if you take that view, then free will doesn't exist. Then you are simply a biological automaton, a robot, pre-programmed, and you have no choice, you have no complexity. And if something goes wrong in your life, if you're sad or whatever, you're just a broken machine. Now, we know that's not correct. Instinctively, we can hear that materialism is just not the correct way of operating. So in this next quote, Richard Swinburne, who's a philosopher, he says that dualism helps to preserve free will, helps us to understand. So it's a science that shows us that quantum physics is a science that shows us that free will exists, and the philosophy of dualism helps us to understand that. So we determine our actions in the light of reasons and desires. So in other other words, we, you and me, we with our free will, we can generate this activity. We can control this epigenetic factor. We can control our reactions, which is so exciting. We can choose to change the things of our life. And this is what operating in the perfect you is, being aware of this ability to change. So then it goes on, the quote, we intuit and nothing any neuroscientist has produced shows it is any different. So the science of neuroscience is confirming dualistic interactionism. Quantum neuroscience confirms that the brain responds to the mind, and that we use our mind and we push our mind through our brain, and we store our memories in our brain, but we pretty much tell our brain and our body what to do, which is great to know. So quantum probabilities, this is the rest of the quote, show that things cannot be predetermined. And I want to stress this: when it comes to free will means that we don't know exactly what we're going to choose in the next minute. We can't totally predict what someone else is going to predict. We don't know what's going to happen in the next hour. And this indeterminism shows that we have uniqueness. It shows that we have free will. Now, we know that the scriptures say constantly that we have uniqueness, we have free will. Well, here we have the philosophy of dualistic interactionism that confirms that. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about quantum physics in terms of science, and how it also confirms that we are unique and that we have free will. So just on page 68, I want to just read a little thing from, I just want to comment on that page, on page 68. I refer to a couple of physicists who confirm this. Nobel Prize winning physicists like John Wheeler, who won a Nobel Prize. He said that basically we create reality by our thinking, feeling, and choosing. Eugene Wigner, another Nobel Prize laureate, said that the whole of reality is a construct of the mind. So in other words, our mind is creating matter. And then we have, then I've given you some scriptures, and I want to read this. Philosophical idealism, which is really what dualistic interactionism is, what I'm talking about in the perfect you, is the key to understanding the perfect you. And it's a distinctive way of thinking, feeling, and choosing. And then I go on to explain a bit more science and scriptures. Now, how can we apply this idealism in our life? Well, you need to realize that as you uniquely, and I'm reading now page 69, application of idealism, as we uniquely perceive, we create unique realities. I really want you to get that today. This is really what this philosophy chapter is telling you. As you uniquely think, feel, and choose with your incredible mind, you are creating realities. So ask yourself, what reality do you want to create today? Do you want to get worried about that issue that's about to face you once you finish getting off this YouTube live? Let's say you're facing some business decision that you have to make, or some decision with your family. Do you want to get worked up? Because when you get worked up, you step out of your perfect you, and you're not going to have wisdom. You're not going to have clarity of vision. You're not going to have clear thinking. You're just going to get worked up, and you're going to make yourself feel sick, and that's going to inhibit how you function. So you may as well step into the love zone, step into your perfect you, and do what I call freaking out in the love zone, which is one of my favorite things to say. And it's one of my favorite things to do. Because really, freaking out in the love zone is allowing you to be you and to acknowledge the things of life. If something is scary or worrying, or is a trauma, or is something difficult that you have to face in your business or something, it's no point pretending it doesn't exist, or just quoting a scripture to try and pretend it's not there as a magic potion. It is so much more. It is taking the situation and saying, okay, this is a problem. These are and being rational, logical, calm, peaceful, and as you are identifying them, stepping out of yourself and really and looking at these things rationally. And then maybe as you're doing that, saying, oh, this is awful, and maybe getting a little bit frustrated, and maybe getting a little bit angry, and getting maybe even you might shout or get irritated, but don't stay there. You stay in the love zone. You're getting frustrated. You're acknowledging it. You're not suppressing it. You are acknowledging your emotions, but now you move forward. What are you going to do? Take that frustration, take that concern, take that worry in your mind, and change how you are going to create the next reality. What thought are you going to build in your brain to solve this problem that you need to solve? Because you create the reality. The way you think with your mind now is going to interact with your brain, and you're going to build a thought in your brain that is going to produce your next words and actions. So what matter are you going to create in your brain? Because the matter you create matters in the very next decision that you make. That's what this book is about, telling you how to do this. And this is mental health. When we make good decisions, we are stepping into the love zone. We are stepping into how to apply the correct thinking, feeling, and choosing. So if we flip over to the next page, page 70, and I'm almost done with this chapter and I want to dive into the science chapter, is that I define materialism. And once again, materialism is the opposite of idealism. It is the opposite of the interactive dualism. It is the opposite of the mind changes the brain. Materialism, let me remind you, tells you that you are your brain, that the physical is the most important and that the spiritual mind component doesn't count. And that's wrong, because that takes away uniqueness, takes away individuality, takes away free will, and we know instinctively that that is incorrect. But it's a very dominant philosophy, and it's very dominant in how it's applied in terms of mental health. Materialism is when people are told that they have depression as a clinical diagnosis, or schizophrenia as a clinical diagnosis, or OCD as a clinical diagnosis, and they're told that they have a disease. That is a materialistic approach. That is saying that it's in your brain and that it's kind of like a hopeless situation, that your brain is making you do it. Meanwhile, you have a complex story. You have something that you're going through, and it's tough. And feeling the feeling of depression is very real. And I'm really, because I care for you, this is why I'm sharing this with you. This depression, this anxiety, these are very real things. I'm not denying them, but they're not diseases. They are signals to you. They are descriptive. They are words that describe that there's something that is not right. They are a form of disequilibrium. When you feel the sadness, when you feel that nagging anxiety, when you feel those panic attacks, when you feel those intrusive thoughts, those are responses in your brain to your mind, to the toxic issue that needs attention. So knowing that, there's hope. Knowing that you're not a broken, diseased individual that's got to be medicated the rest of your life is wonderful, because you know now that therefore you can step into your perfect you, grow your perfect you, develop this incredible power in you to help you to have the resilience to deal with those underlying issues. So materialism doesn't help us with those things. It doesn't help us. It takes away our individuality and our uniqueness. Look at page 71, and I talk about MRI, middle of the page, MRIs, fMRIs, PET scans, SPEC scans. These are incredible brain technology. But you can't look at an MRI or a SPEC scan and say, that's why you're depressed. What technology shows us is that your brain is responding. So we're wired for love. When we're operating in our correct thinking, feeling, and choosing, we'll see the SPEC scan, the MRI, whatever, they will show the correct kind of firing. When we are feeling sad or toxic, or we've got issues in our life, we will see the brain scan looks different. But it's not telling you your thought. You can't what they're trying to do is map all emotions onto an ideal neurological brain pattern and say that if we don't show that kind of pattern, then we're abnormal. That's terrible to tell people, because you're completely unique. The way you respond to a situation, the way I respond to the same situations, completely different. And yes, we'll see some change in our brain because technology shows us that the brain is responding to the mind. It shows us something's going on. And if it's toxic, it's going to be damaging. And if it's healthy, it's going to be positive. But it doesn't tell you why you made that choice, or why you're thinking in that way, or what you're going through. In other words, your complex story. So moving on to the next chapter, let's step. I'm going to read you one more quote on page 76. Go to page 76, and this is a quote by one of my favorite quantum physicists who's still alive, who's in his 90s, who has really got into the very advanced version of quantum physics, which we'll talk about in this next chapter. And he says the following on page 76. The free choices made by the human players, that's you and I, can be seen as miniature versions of the choices that appear to be needed at the creation of the universe. So he's basically saying that we have free will, and the choices that we make seem to reflect this image-bearing nature of God. Quantum theory So the science of quantum theory opens the doors to and indeed demands the making of free choices. So quantum physics confirms that we as humanity make free choices. Quantum physics can't work without a human's ability to make free choices. This situation is concordant with the idea of a powerful God that creates the universe and its laws to get things started, but then bequeaths part of this power to beings created in his own image. So that's basically saying that we made in God's image. God is brilliant, thinks, feels, and chooses, and we have this ability to think, feel, and choose inside of us. Okay, so going on to chapter 5, The Science of the Perfect You. On page 78, so I'm going to read another quick quote by Henry Stapp, and then we're going to talk about the overview of this chapter, and then I'm going to explain the principles. This is a very complicated chapter, so I'm going to make it as simple as I can for you, which will then help you when you go back and reread this. Please remember, you're never going to understand something the first time you listen or the first time you read. The way we as humans build memory is by going over things, listening to it over and over, reading things over and over, making more and more notes, etc. And that's how you need to approach this content as well. For you to get the most out of this year, all of our work together that we're going to do, you need to put in the time and the effort. While you're doing that, you're building your brain and improving your mental health. So while you're studying this stuff, you are already improving your brain intelligence and mental health. So that's just a side note. Okay, so the quote on page 78, under chapter 5, the heading, The Science of the Perfect You. I have another quote by Henry Stapp. I apologize for that. Okay. In quantum theory, experience is the essential reality, and matter is viewed as a representation of the primary reality, which is experience. That's a mouthful. Let me just translate it for you. In quantum theory, so we're getting into science, and in the science of the perfect you, we get really dive into quantum theory. In quantum theory, experience is the essential reality. So your experience, what you feel, what you are going through today as you move through the day and as you move through your life, your experience is the most important reality. Okay. And how you experience, and when you align that experience with the truth, which is God, you are then creating a reality that is true experience, that is healthy experience in your unique way. That is why I say we're wired for love. Your perfect you is activating your godly design of being wired for love. So basically, in quantum theory, experience is the essential reality, and matter is viewed as the representation of the primary reality, which is experience. And what that is saying is that as you experience life today, as you think, feel, and choose through your day, you are building stuff into your brain. And quantum physics explains that process. So what I did all these years, for 30 years ago, when I started my research working with patients, I ran a clinical practice for 25 years, working with all kinds of people with brain damage and learning problems and so on. And I explained that in my books and so on. I found that it was essential that they understood their internal experience, that they understood how they function. So I developed a theory, which then helped me develop the tools that are in all my books and DVDs and online programs and apps and so on, to help people to understand this essential reality and what that means. Okay, so I want you, in this chapter, this is what I have tried to summarize. I have tried to summarize the science behind this. So let's have a look to make this as easy as possible. Let's have a look on the bottom of page 79, the last paragraph I'm going to read. If you're perfect, so it's the last paragraph on page 79, and then we're going to look at the image in this chapter. If your perfect you is repeatedly distorted or suppressed, habituation occurs and patterns of toxic reactions are set up. These toxic thinking patterns create disorder in the mind and neurological and neurodegenerative chaos in the brain. So the science of the perfect you is based on my theory called the Geodesic information processing theory that explains the philosophy of dualistic interactionism, which is the mind changes the brain and the mind works with the brain and the mind controls the brain. And basically, I'm showing in my theory that the perfect you, when we when we think out of our correct thinking, we basically change the way our brain functions. So that's what I mean by there. When we thinking in a toxic way, we distort our perfect you, we distort our brain. It's going to result in changes in the brain. And when we change our thinking, when we renew our mind, when we bring those thoughts into captivity, we change our brain again. This is dualistic interactionism. This is what my theory of the geodesic information processing theory explains. And then out of this theory, I developed the perfect you, the different profiles. And next week, we're going to be talking about the UQ, the unique qualitative assessment profile. Today, for the rest of today, I'm just going to quickly explain to you the design of the perfect you. So the science, my theory, the geodesic information processing theory, which is a mouthful, explains the science of the perfect you and the foundations for this principle of mind changes brain, the connection between the mind and the brain, and also the fact that you can identify the structure of your perfect you, which is the developmental organic process. So look at page 81. Look at the middle of the page where I've got the title, the heading, the perfect you design. I'm going to quickly read that paragraph. The perfect you has a structure that can be explained using the geodesic information processing model that I developed nearly 30 years ago, and that I have, by the way, constantly will constantly continue to develop through research and through clinical trials and so on. The UQ profile in part 3 of this book, which we're talking about next week, was developed out of the structure. And all the principles of mind-changing brain were developed out of this theory that I developed. So scientist studies philosophy and science, develops theories, develops applications, and that's pretty much what I'm showing you in this book. Okay, so I will explain next week. We're going to talk about the structure of the perfect you to understand how the UQ profile works. For now, let's look at my theory to help you to understand the science behind the perfect you and the profile coming up. And all these things that I'm teaching you, all my work, the mind-brain connection, how your toxic thoughts form, how they change, all of that is based on my theory. And that's why you'll see, if you look on pages 84 and 85, you will see this image. And I want you to get this image out now because we're going to talk about this image a little bit now. You'll see this comes up all the time in my work. I'm constantly working on developing this, and you will see that all my research theory, clinical trials, applications are based on this theory, which is how the mind influences the brain, how the spirit works with the physical part of us, how our brain responds to our mind, how we have free will, and so on. So if you look at this image, on this side, so where you see my hand now, you'll see some circles. You'll see 7 circles. If you move up to the top of the page, you'll see the heading metacognitive level. If I drag my hand along, you'll see over here it says cognitive level, and over here symbolic level. These are 3 levels. Very simplistically, look at it this way. Can you see the smiley face over there? Look at the smiley face. That smiley face represents you responding to life. So it's what you say, what you do. It's you in life. Okay. And basically what you say and what you do is not some random event. It's based upon a whole bunch of stuff that is going on in your conscious and your non-conscious mind. So this cognitive level is your conscious mind, and this over here, this metacognitive level, is your non-conscious mind. These two, the conscious and the non-conscious, make up your spiritual part of you, your non-physical part of you, which is the 99% part of you. So these two here make up your 99%, and that makes up this, where the smiley face is the 1%. Down the bottom over here, I'm explaining how the brain responds to the mind. So here you are thinking, feeling, and choosing, and in life, smiley face. And why do you say what you do? Well, you've thought about it. So you've been consciously, just before you speak, just before you speak or do something, you have been thinking and feeling and making choices. You've been doing stuff. You've been consciously making a decision. And that conscious decision is based upon what's going on in your non-conscious mind. So the non-conscious mind is the biggest part, and the two together form the 99%. And this part's the biggest part of the 99%. So the non-conscious part. This is where all your memories are stored. So all your memories that you've been building since you're in the womb, all your memories, your belief systems, your attitude, it works 24/7. It's always active. And this is the core of this, is your perfect you nature. So when we do the profile, we're looking at the design of your non-conscious mind. And we do it through understanding these different pillar, what we call neurological pillars or pillars of thought. So there's a design to your non-conscious mind that is made in God's image, that is wired for love. So when we talk about being wired for love, this little 7 bubbles area over here within this framework is the science behind that there's a structure. Now, no science can fully explain the uniqueness and the brilliance of who you are. So this is an attempt to give you an insight into your brilliance, okay? So these 7 bubbles all interact and work together, and they're called metacognitive modules, and they've got processing systems, and they've got all this fancy stuff that I describe in this chapter. But essentially, this is our 24/7 quantum perfect you nature that is driving this conscious mind, that is driving what we say and what we do. So by being consciously aware of what we're saying and what we're doing, so by using our conscious mind, which is only awake when we're awake, so this part's only awake when you're awake. So right now your conscious mind is awake, your non-conscious mind's always awake. So at the moment, while you're listening to me, there's you listening to me. This part is working with this part. When you're sleeping tonight, only this part is working. The conscious part switches off. So while we're conscious in the day, in the moment, as you leave this meeting and you go off to whatever you've got to do, you can be conscious and deliberate and intentional about what are you saying? What are you doing? What is the impact of what you're saying and what you're doing? Why are you saying and doing what you're doing? Is there something that you should be changing? Is your reaction incorrect? Are you reacting in a certain way because you are maybe toxic from a trauma that you've never dealt with? So is there something, is your behavior, if you are conscious and deliberate and intentional, I'm pointing to this cognitive level about what you're saying and what you're doing, you can start finding what's going on here that is influencing how you are functioning. The core of this part over here is perfect, but we go through life thinking, feeling, and choosing, making wrong decisions, and we add another layer on top of that layer, and that layer is the imperfect layer. So we have at the core, the foundation, the majority, the biggest part is perfect. Okay, because it's a blueprint for perfection. It's made in God's image, but we have free will. So we wire imperfection on top of perfection. And that the evidence of that pops into our conscious mind. So you're in the next business decision that you're about to make as you go from this meeting, or you're in a discussion with your friend or your husband or your family or your wife or whatever, and whatever you are saying in response to the incoming situation is going to be influenced by what's already in the non-conscious mind. So as you're listening, good things are coming up and bad things are coming up from the non-conscious mind, and if you are conscious and deliberate about focusing on them, you are going to be able to understand and see, hey, that's a toxic thought. I need to deal with that. That's influencing my reaction. That's making me feel sick or whatever. I'm stepping out of my perfect you. So you can learn how to capture those thoughts and change them. But if you don't understand your perfect you nature, it becomes very difficult. And that's why I'm starting this mental health initiative with the perfect you, with your identity, so that you can recognize what it feels like to be deliberate and consciously aware of when you, to the point where you can identify the toxic versus the non-toxic. It's a choice to be deliberate and intentional about your thinking. So this chapter explains all of these different components, and this little very busy part over here of this image, of this image over here, explains what I spoke about in chapter 3, and that you hear me speaking about a lot if you follow my teachings, about how we need to change over a period of 63 days, how there's a conscious and deliberate process and work that we need to do over 63 days, cycles of 21, once we've identified that toxic thought and to change it. But we are effective in making those changes when we understand our perfect you, when we understand the purpose behind it. So therefore, this scientific chapter is dealing with the science behind the perfect you. So these 2 chapters are difficult, they are challenging, and I hope that this explanation will help you look at them differently. I really challenge you to go back, dive into them, read them 20 times if you have to, because you will benefit so much. You will see the power of your mind. You will see the power of free will. You'll see the beautiful design within you. Okay, now we're going to go to some questions. Thank you for all your amazing questions that you've been sending through. They are fantastic. I can't even answer all of them. I've read all of them. Myself and my team have gone through all of them, and there's so many. So over the year, we hope we'll get to all of them as best we can. So I've had to select, just to be fair, I've had to select and group them together. And I'm going to answer 5 questions now. And then hopefully over time, we've got podcasts, please, I refer you to my podcast. Go to my Instagram, Dr. Caroline Leaf, and on there, you'll be able to find my podcast, my TV show, my mental self-care tips, my books, so much information, and these YouTube lives. You can link through to them from there as well. You can go back and watch these YouTube lives, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can get this information. So in other words, a lot of your questions I have already answered in my podcasts, in my blogs. Join our email list if you haven't already subscribed. You're going to get so much more supportive information from different angles to help you to conquer this information. So I'm going to answer these questions as best I can. And if your questions are answered, as I said, go to the podcast, join the email list, become a subscriber, follow me so that you can you will find your answer somewhere in all that information. First question, how to stay in the perfect you even when, this is question number 1, how do you stay in the perfect you when an unplanned situation happens where it's not really anyone's fault? How can I ensure that negativity does not build long-term negative memory and cause trauma? Brilliant question, and actually already answered in what I've said today, but let me be more specific and practical now in answering this question and applying today's information to this. Okay, so how can you stay in the perfect you? First of all, the evidence that you're in your perfect you is that you will feel a sense of peace, a sense of calmness, a sense of clarity of thought, even though your heart is pounding and the adrenaline's pumping, because in your perfect you state, you've made stress work for you and not against you. You are thinking yes, there is a level of maybe anxiety, but the anxiety you are recognizing and embracing that anxiety in a sense where you're not frightened of the anxiety, you're not letting it control you. You are using it to say, okay, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling on edge, I'm feeling that something's not right. Why? And you step into the perfect you with a mindset of, I accept the anxiety. It's telling me something, as opposed to, oh, this is bad. I'm anxious. I can't cope. I'm stressed. Don't do that. The minute you do that, you push yourself into a state where you're not going to be able to deal with the unplanned. Now, just FYI, everything pretty much is unplanned. As I talk about in the rest of the science chapter, which I didn't specifically deal with in the first part of today, but I'm going to reference it now. In the second part of the science chapter, I talk about quantum physics a lot, and I talk about the principle of indeterminacy, which is the unpredictable nature of life and the unpredictable nature of choice, that you and people that you know, you can't exactly predict what people are going to say. And this is why we need to make sure that we're in our perfect you, so we access wisdom. But life is filled with potential. We're immersed in incredible potential and wisdom. So, and that wisdom and that potential comes from God. So as we tune into our perfect you nature, we tune into the fact that we're immersed in the love potential, and we can find those answers. But if we step into our imperfect you and out of the love zone, and we freak out in the fear zone, we can't think straight. We can't access that wisdom. We can't see those potentials. So indeterminacy, or the not in indeterminacy, which means that you don't actually know what's coming up next, is part of life. But you can handle this. Most of things are unplanned. Very few things will go exactly according to plan. So by just knowing that, you change your mindset. Go into life realizing that there is this indeterminacy in our life. Things are unplanned. So you are equipped. You are equipped to handle that. You're equipped to step into your perfect you, to think, feel, and choose with clarity, and to find that right answer. So instead of falling apart and panicking, you say, okay, well, logically, these are the facts. What should I do? What's the best option? And you're kind of standing back and observing your own thinking as you do that. Okay, so by doing that, you then prevent a toxic trauma from forming. And as I said in chapter 3, I think it was page 62, where I've got that little image of the descent to disorder, where I show that over 21 days, it moves from uneasiness to worry to shock to trauma. I track the time frame. Now that you're aware, you don't have to get caught up in that. You can stop the cycle before it begins. You can be proactive. You can be preventative, as opposed to just falling into the trap of, oh, now I can't control this. You can control this. You create your reality. You have free will. Okay, question 2. How do you use the concepts in the perfect you to help those who have suffered major injuries like traumatic brain injuries, etc.? So, one of the first things I did with my patients, and I specialized with traumatic brain injuries. One of the areas I specialized in people who have neurological damage from car accidents, from whatever kind of head trauma. It was one of the areas that I spent a lot of time doing research in, and a lot of the techniques I developed were to help them to cope with those issues. Now, every time you have any kind of damage to your brain, whether it is from a physical injury or whether it is from an emotional trauma, your brain is damaged, you need to know, first of all, your brain can change. Your brain can heal. Your brain is neuroplastic. So that's the first thing that's really important. Secondly, is how does it change? Through you understanding the power of your mind. So, how does the perfect you help someone with traumatic brain injury? By understanding, it helps you to have insight and understanding into the power of your mind. And it shows you, so by doing the profile, which is what I would do with my patients, by doing the profile, they got insight into how much power they had, by understanding that you're wired for love, by understanding that you have free will, that you can change, by understanding that when you're consciously aware and deliberate and intentional about your thinking, you can actually rewire your brain and build your brain. So it's a very first important point in helping people to understand their identity. It gives people power and hope. When people have power and hope, the whole body changes. There is lots of evidence and research, and I cite some of it in my book, The Perfect You, showing that when you think in your naturally optimistic bias, you increase the resilience in your brain and your body. You activate genetic switches in your brain that help you to be stronger and have more resilience as you work through healing from that brain trauma. Question number 3. How, as a teacher, can I implement the perfect you concepts in my class? I trained in education for over 25 years. I've trained thousands upon thousands of teachers. I've worked in many different education systems in South Africa and in the United States, and my techniques are around the world. So I've got a lot of experience in education. And the reason I'm telling you that is because this really is a brilliant tool in education. We need to get our kids to understand their identity and how the power of their mind so that they can control and deal with one of the most difficult stages of your life is between the ages of 12 and 18, and where identity is really challenged. And I've done a podcast on this. So go and have a look at the podcast on this that I did on identity and children. The perfect you is a vital component in helping children growing up young and your teenagers to understand how they think, how they feel, how they choose, how the impact and the power of their thoughts changes their brain, how they build thoughts into the brain, and how those thoughts are basically the roots of what they say and that they do, and that they can change that, how to cope with trauma, how to cope with the stresses of life. That's what the perfect you is going to help you. Now, how do you do that? So I have a lot of different books and techniques that can help you to to adapt this down to an education level. So you can go to our site and you'll see the 5-step learning process is a book and DVD that was designed specifically for teachers in the education system, and it makes these principles very easy to apply in the classroom. You can also send us an email. We can actually help to install these systems into schools and give you more details. So if you could send an email to info@drleaf.com, we can point you in the correct direction and help you with specific application in your classroom. But it does begin with what you can do today is you understanding this for you and then adapting it down to the level of your students and starting to share what you're gaining from this book with your students, empowering them to understand the power of their mind. But question number 5, what was your process, Dr. Leaf, when you developed the geodesic information processing model? What advice do you have for those interested in pursuing a similar career or study? Well, helping people was very much a driving force. I was always fascinated with the mind and the brain. I was always fascinated with the power that we have inside of us. So very early on, I got into working in environments in South Africa, with people in very poorly performing areas, poverty-stricken, rape, abuse, trauma, those kind of environments, which then showed me the power of the mind. And I would spend many hours helping them developing these techniques and helping them to understand how to think, how to learn, and how to change their brain. So the work that I was doing was inspiring me to do more research. My basic degree was in communication pathology and neuroscience and neuropsychology, which helped me to understand that the link between the mind and the brain, and to look at the behaviors and symptoms that people have in terms of what they say and what they do, and track that back to their thought life and track that back to what's going on in the brain, to see the mind brain connection. And then I adapted that and applied that as I did my research, seeing the need. I saw a need when my patients would come to me in my practice, or I'd go into these areas. I saw a need to show people that you have this incredible power in you. So I started developing different diagnostic tools and theories to help people to understand the mind brain connection. So it was really working with people and seeing the need of people to understand that you're not a helpless victim, that you have this brilliant brain. And that really drove me to dive into many different fields of research to find these techniques to help people. And as I said, I keep on researching and developing. We are starting a clinical trial this year on showing people how to it's called a non-pharmacological intervention for anxiety and depression. We've got an app coming out in a few weeks' time to help people to apply these techniques. So I encourage you, stay this journey with me this year. Get the perfect you, which is what we're doing this month. Dive in at any stage, even if you haven't. Join us. Go to drleaf.com. The book's on less 35% at the moment. Still, get your book. These, as I said, these are recorded, so you can go back in time and rewatch these as many times as you want. Share this message with others. Talk about this, get a group going. If you want more help, we have the book and DVD as well. So there's a workbook and a DVD to help you work through these concepts. The workbook and DVD match each other chapter by chapter. You could get a group going where you show the video. Each person has the video and the book, and they work through the workbook, and you can have discussion groups. This is an ongoing, life-changing process. So even though we're doing this for a month, the books and the techniques and the perfect you and all the books we're going to be talking about, these are lifelong skills. These are things you're going to do for the rest of your life. These are preventative mind management techniques. And in closing, what I want to say to you is that it's not mental health that's on the rise. It's the mismanagement of mental health that has created a whole new problem. And this year, we are learning how to manage mental health in the correct way. And your identity, your perfect you, is the first step. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you through the week on social media. And I look forward to seeing you next Friday again with the YouTube Live. God bless. Have a fantastic week and find your identity.